Constructive Criticism is sponsored by Oasis Games. MTGOasis.com is the place to get cards for your next Magic event. Try them out with code CCMTG for 15% off of your first order, and use the code WouldThatBeGood for 4% off of every order. Want to support the show directly? Head on over to patreon.com/CCMTG to check out some awesome benefits and future goals for the show. Thanks for listening, and here's this week's episode of Constructed Criticism. Hello everyone and welcome to the Constructed Criticism Network. This network is here to help you improve at Magic the Gathering at every level. From Pauper Leagues to Top 1000 Mythic, we've got you covered. If you want to hear the entire network, head on over to our sponsor at PureMTGO.com, where you can hear each and every show, each and every week, and check out their sponsor, MTGO Traders, and tell them that the CCMTG Network sent you. Now sit back, enjoy the show. From YouTube, podcasts, and more, here's this week's episode from ConstructedCriticism.com.
Hello everyone, welcome to the 389th episode of Constructed Criticism. I am your jolly host Mason, joined by my two filled with Christmas cheer co-hosts and Hanukkah-loving co-host Abe. Spencer and Abe, how you doing? Abe likes Hanukkah.
Do you not have Christmas cheer?
Yeah.
No, I'm like a total Grinch. I've really lost. Are you Jewish, Abe?
Yeah.
Like practicing, or
yeah, like a very big part of my life.
Oh, I didn't know
it
that.
Was for a long time. I'm not like super practicing right now, but I'm pretty secular as far as Jews come.
100% of my 100% of the podcasts that I am on have a Jewish co-host, and I didn't realize that.
J to C,
dude, straight up, literally on the last episode of Need to Nerd, I learned how the candles work in Hanukkah. I just assumed that you lit the next candle and then lit them all the next time. I did not realize how it worked.
Yeah, it's a whole thing.
Like, at all. And, West informed me, so, I got a little more culture in my life because of it.
That sounds like great listening for anyone interested in expanding their horizons.
It was at the end of the show. We were talking about the holidays coming up, so, if people weren't interested, they could...
Before you get
Yeah.
culture.
I just watched Curb Your Enthusiasm. Anyways.
My Hanukkah reference, for what it's worth, is like the Maccababies episode of Rugrats, so maybe you have
all
better...
Time.
Maybe.
All time great.
I mean, I had a friend who was practicing when I was in elementary school, and I remember going to their house and lighting the candles, but I don't remember anything past that. I was like also 5 or 6, but I have a very clear memory of like the room being dark and the candle being lit.
I think that like understanding other cultures and learning about them is like a really great always improving moment.
Speaking of always improving, today we're going to be doing our Midnight Vow re-review, and we're going to be always improving by looking over the set and kind of what we talked about with our first Pick 2 set review, and going back now and kind of looking at the lessons learned and sort of giving a sunset episode to the Crimson Vow Midnight Hunt, because boys, I don't know if you knew this, but we are only 44 days away from Kamigawa. I bet you didn't expect me to already have the new data, but we're 44 days from Kamigawa. Wow, how exciting. Neon Dynasty is right around the corner. Previews. But first, we have to do always improving. That is the main point of the show, and it is my turn to be up first this time. Spencer realized I was calling him first every week last time. Maybe I wasn't. I don't actually know, but I felt called out, so I will start things off this time. And my always improving moment is taking ownership for going last. No, I'm just joking. No, my always improving moment actually comes from making sure to like go back and double check my homework. So, we come to a lot of conclusions as Magic players, right? And like you'll do testing, you'll do work, and you'll come to conclusions like, hey, I really don't think I want to be using Spreading Seas right now in 4-color control for Modern. I just think, yeah, it has some good spots, but it's not what it's about right now. I'd much rather do this sort of thing and play my deck in a more reactive than tap out style way. But things change. We had a whole new set release from kind of the last time in that example. And not only that have things changed, but the meta has shifted a little bit. We have some new decks on the block. And so while I thought that maybe that would still hold true, I went back and I played some leagues with 4-color control, doing a bunch of stuff I don't like to do. I trimmed a bunch of the stuff that I had kind of become Mason specials outside of Reflecting Pool. I still got Reflecting Pool out of my deck. Won't catch me with that card. I put in the Spreading Seas, I put in Teferi 5 and that sort of stuff, and I tried them out and just reevaluated. And some of it I was a little higher on, some of it I was lower on than I actually was before. And it was really good, though, just to be like, hey, I came to these conclusions, but this work was done on kind of a previous version. We've had a patch note since then. I gotta re-up my game, see where we're at, and that was my always improving moment. So
Yeah, super important to do that. Always updating your priors and making sure that everything's still the same before you roll in and find out it's different is super good. I'm gonna take always improving next so that Spencer gets to go last and feel the pressure off. And my always improving this week actually came from something I did with Spencer over the weekend, which was a little bit of a hammer coaching session we recorded for the YouTube. I don't know if it's up yet or if it'll be up soon. But
I told Fernando, our editor, that just to like, get to whatever he can.
yeah,
So
hopefully that'll be up soon. I think that that's going to be a really good resource for people who want to get their feet wet about hammer and kind of like what I offer as a coach. I think it'll be really awesome. But in doing that and preparing for that, and partially also, I started playing Runeterra with my brother. I got him to start playing the game because he'd been playing a lot of Hearthstone and really enjoying it, but wanting something a little different. And so I told him to check out Runeterra, and we did his first draft ever, grappling with the like huge amount of prior experience that I draw on to make decisions, and like instead of taking that as something that's just always there and kind of reminding myself that that's something I need to articulate and define better sometimes to help people. There were like times where I was taking lines playing with Spencer where like to me in my brain it was intuitive, but getting the words together and why it is that was the intuitive thing for me to do into a thought and to express that to Spencer is kind of like a big challenge of coaching and a big challenge of helping someone improve. And in doing so is a really great way to, kind of find flaws in those ingrained patterns that you kind of rely on. And also just to make sure you're still in touch with them and that things are still the same. I just over both games, both in Magic and in Runeterra, kind of felt like it made me really appreciate the things that I did understand, and also have me shed new light on things that I maybe didn't understand as well as I thought I did.
So I want to talk about humility and understanding humility in the game of Magic.
It's a really game-changing card. It's like...
Yeah,
everything's a 1/1.
Yeah. It's really hard. It's your moment, not mine. My bad. I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. I don't think that Abe or I knew what to expect from like what was going to happen when like we turned on the camera. And there were moments where Abe was like, "Yeah, here's what I would do. Here's why," that were so different than what I would do. And then, like, I talked about in the video, but there were like at the end of the video, I talked about like 3 defining things that I learned. But there were also moments where like I was like, "Hey Abe, why didn't we do this?" And there was one specific moment where Abe was like, "Oh yeah, that was way better. I just was on autopilot mode and didn't even think about that. Thank you for calling me out." And it just kind of reminds me of like the times that I have done coaching. No matter who you're playing Magic with, there's so much to Magic. Or I actually think that this episode will actually come out before the Common Knowledge episode for what it's worth, just because of how their schedule is lined up. But like one of the things that we talked about is Smash Brothers Ultimate on that, because of Christian saying that like playing Smash Brothers and talking about improving was like one of the ways he's improved the most at Magic with me, is just talking about improvement. And in that we talked about a player in that game. His name is MK Leo. And for context for people, MK Leo is the best Smash Bros. Ultimate player of all time. The game's been out for almost 4 years, and he has actually never taken less than 3rd place. Just actually ever in every tournament. And the thing is like I talked about how you go from this game, right, that has 0 variance, is 100% skill based, to this game that is not like that. I have no idea how to play Hammer Time. I've actually none. And Abe has a ton of experience. But Abe, knowing the way that Magic worked, was still willing to consider a line that I said and question himself and if his line was wrong. And we came to the conclusion that his line was wrong. And it was like a moment where like, am I starting to understand this deck? Is Abe learning while teaching? Which, by the way, is really common for Magic players. Putting both of ourselves in a position where we're not trying to go into autopilot mode, where we're not trying to just do the fastest combo-y play possible and like kind of not just go through the motions. And one of the things that's really special about Abe's list that you'll see in the video is he has a lot more double white spells than I think most Hammer Time lists, and it actually makes the way you sequence really different and really hard. At the end of the video, I talk about how different it is sequencing with a deck like this than with a deck like Affinity that has, in all honesty, like a lot of similar cards and a similar game plan sometimes. It was kind of humbling to both myself in understanding like your experience with Affinity, a deck that you've played a ton of in Modern, does not one for one translate. And I also seeing humility from Abe in this moment of coaching this person that's literally never touched this deck was refreshing. And I think that like it goes to show that like when you get the opportunity to play with somebody with similar goals to you, you should do that. You should take that. I did a coaching session with Beyond the Metagame hosts, both of them. It was really funny because even in that session, I'm like really bad at Smash for those who don't know. Like I'm like compared to the players play, and even in that session, he's like, dude, you are so good at up smashing with Wolf on time. It's insane. I actually don't know how to beat that. And like I can't beat it without just getting away from you. And it's those kind of moments where you have in, whether it's coaching, whether it's matchup versus matchup, like there's sometimes where you got to play to your strengths. There's sometimes where you've got to learn something new, but it was really cool to see the humility from somebody who's probably registered 300 plus hours with a deck, willing to listen to me, but also teach me those 300 plus hours.
I didn't even think about it as like a moment of humility. I really just, I want the coaching that I provide to be, I always feel like you can learn from someone. And, you know, I always feel like I have things that I can, you know, hopefully impart on other people and like everything in life. And so, you know, the fact that was a moment we got to have in that session was really awesome. And like, you know, I'm glad you appreciate it, and I don't want to make anything big out of it. You know, it's just part of playing Magic and trying to learn and grow is that you'll make mistakes and identify them. So.
That's going to do it for the Always Improving segment of the show. Let's hop straight, though, into our main topic, which is a re-review of the Midnight Hunt Crimson Vow standard. As we talked about a bunch on the show in the past, these sets came out in a very short time from each other. There wasn't a lot of time in order to do the typical re-review of Midnight Hunt by itself, so we decided to combine them together since they, you know, they are both Innistrad or whatever, and we'll kind of talk about both of them here and kind of how we go through things. But basically, if you haven't listened to one of our set reviews before and you're new to the show, the way we do it is we have 4 categories, and we pick 2 cards for each category. And today we're going to be looking back over 2 of those categories to talk about them. The 2 categories we're looking over are sleepers and hits. Hits, self-explanatory. Those are going to be cards that you expect to be big players in the format. Things are going to impact them. Sleepers, as you might guess, are cards that are people not really talking about a whole bunch that we think are going to be big players. So basically, you would think of a sleeper as like, hey, this might be like a hit or a hit light that no one is talking about. And these happen every set and happens every time with the Magic set. There's always, you know, oh, there are no good cards. There's nothing going on. And unless it's Ixalan, that's not true. So we get to get back over and talk about them all here today. And part of that process is us kind of going back through our lists of what we had before. So Abe, do you want to kind of start us off here with your Midnight Hunt lists?
Yeah, so for Midnight Hunt, my hits were Consider, the, you know, better opt or whatever, and Lear, Disciple of the Drowned, to some contention from my co-host. And my sleepers were Hungry for More and Arcane Infusion, which are cards that I thought had some potential, and then I would be surprised if anyone listening to this podcast knew them by name. So
I want to be clear about something. All that I said was at the very end of the episode that specifically Reckless Stormseeker seemed better than Lear to me. That is the only negative thing I said about Lear.
Can I share a little behind the scenes?
I mean, sure, but I don't think
where after we finished recording, you said that card is atrocious.
I stand by what I said at the moment.
That's funny because you said basically the same thing on the podcast.
Yeah,
I just listened to it.
I know. I'm going to talk about what I learned from that today. That's the whole point of this episode.
Yeah. So those were
Gotta
those
take
were
your
my
L's.
and sleepers. I'm glad I could get that out there. I don't have to live a lie anymore.
I remember saying that it seemed like a 5-mana do nothing. I don't remember saying that card seems atrocious.
It was a word analogous to bad.
Okay.
Because you were definitely like, hey, what were you saying?
Yeah.
At the end of it, too. And I was like, amen, Spencer.
Because we turned off that podcast like right anyway. First of all, I think your hits are gas. What are your sleepers?
My sleepers, which I said were Hungry for More and Arcane Infusion, which are cards that I doubt anyone would know what they did by name.
So funny. We gotta leave that in the show. Abe said them, and then he's like, I doubt anyone knows they're Magic cards. And then Spencer's like, yeah, but what were your sleepers?
Did you say them? Because I actually don't remember. That's gas. Because
they are very forgettable cards missed. I was a believer in there being potential for an aggressive deck to use Hunger for More. Maybe there will be, maybe not.
Sure.
I like Hellspark.
Oh, is Hungry for More the blue one?
Hellspark Elemental card. No, Hunger for More is the red Hellspark Elemental with lifelink.
Okay.
It's a sorcery that makes a 3/1 lifelink that dies at the end of the turn. And then Arcane Infusion is the impulse that finds an instant or sorcery only and has flashback. And I thought that if decks wanted to play enough spell lands to make this card really just be very close to impulse, I thought it'd be really good. But it just turned out that you didn't really have the time, and the format didn't shape up for a card like that to be good. So
also Lear's dominance, right? Like Lear being such a big player in the format makes it not as important, where if maybe Lear wasn't a card, Arcane Infusion would be a card you see as a one of or something in the turn.
Leaving your mana up is so punished when there's so many things that were just...
Mason, what were your hits?
My hits were Reckless Stormseeker and then Moonrage Slash, and then my two sleepers were Briarbridge Tracker and Storm the Festival.
So I think all of your cards but one are basically pretty spot on. What happened with Moonrage Slash?
Honestly, I've looked at it a little bit for Alchemy too, because in Alchemy the werewolf decks got a big boost. They're really strong. I think there's just not a lot of need for it in the format. I think that the green decks have a lot of X4s, and the other decks that go low to the ground go wide pretty quickly outside the mirrors. And then there's the whole awkwardness of actually getting it to cost one. So it's a card that if I could do things different, it would maybe be I don't know, maybe it's going to turn into a sleeper in time, but it just hadn't quite played out where it's needed or whatever. And I think part of the thing too, where these cards not coming together for at least some of them, is that the aggro decks are not good if you're not monocolor. And I think I overestimated how much decks are going to need Faceless Haven. And part of that is because of cards like Fading Hope, which we'll get more into in a little bit.
There's something to be said for Day Night when Midnight Hunt was previewed. We didn't know how that would play. We had a sense of how it would play with the Innistrad Werewolves and how those patterns were, but
it's way different. It's so much
it's
different.
Way different, and there's no real frame of reference. So
active player, non-active player for Day Night is a big difference in that card. Yeah. The way those cards play out.
And also, it turns a little awkward. It's only Lightning Bolt after turn 3, because you can only really have it be Night on turn 3. So the times where you need it to be good just doesn't really feel like it lined up.
I was just gonna say, and that plus too many X-Force just makes it a really hard sell.
Yeah, I think the rest of your cards Reckless Stormseeker, Briarbridge Tracker, and Storm the Festival are all super reasonable, good cards. They're all good.
Yeah, those were all staples of decks in the first 2, 3, 4 weeks of the format. There was a lot of Storm the Festival mid-range decks, kind of an arms race there of trying to Storm the Festival into the biggest stuff. I remember engaging in that some before Epiphany was found to be the top end, and a lot of those were bets on Chariot being as good as it was. So
I actually think Briarbridge Tracker is still underplayed. I've been messing around with Mono Green and Standard again. I think there's some argument to continuing to play some number of a Briarbridge Tracker over for example, your fourth Troll or whatever. I think it kind of depends. And then if you're gonna play Gruul, for example, if you can't actually play the Troll, Briarbridge Tracker just becomes this thing that you get to crew without losing that takes up those slots. So
it's kind of gone away a bit as Alchemy's devolved a little bit, but it's also seeing a little bit of play there. So that's a card that I expect to not see more play in this standard year. But when rotation happens, I expect Briarbridge Tracker's stock to go to the moon. I think that card gets
to the moon
when the rest of the format leaves. Woo! Speaking of to the moon, what are your hits and sleepers, Spencer?
Yeah, so I think that my hits are actually pretty good, and I will explain why, because one of them sees basically no play. We'll talk about the one that I think I specifically said in the podcast. This was for Historic, and it immediately saw play in Historic after I said it, which is Delver of Secrets. I think this card does a lot of different things. We saw this card top 8 some kind of event in Standard with it's not good anymore, but there was this green-blue deck that played Dragon Scale Elite or whatever. We have seen multiple decks with Delver of Secrets plus Dragon Dragon Rage Channeler, yeah. We that just have done well in Historic. I think Delver of Secrets just slots into some number of decks in that format. I'm not surprised. That's what I said in the podcast. It's fine. Like, Delver of Secrets is just a fine card to enter Historic. It's going to need, like I said on the podcast, more cards and a specific format to be good in Standard. We are not in that format. We actually were in that format for a minute in Standard, which is why that deck top 8'd, where, like, if all you were trying to beat were, like, the mono green deck and the Epiphany deck, that blue green deck was actually insane. Like, it was actually really good. But we're not there anymore. That's not in the format anymore. Delver probably won't see Standard play again. I am not giving up on my Bloodthirsty Adversary pick. I actually think this card is still a hit. I was playing it in Historic today with results. They are doing red dirty in Standard right now, fam. I don't know if anybody's noticed how dirty they're doing it, but, like, this card has no support because, like, if you're going to play a red deck, you're, like, playing these other mid-rangey decks that, like, want treasure or other stuff like this, and this card wants to be in a very different style of deck where you're playing a lot of spells instead of a lot of creatures that, like, you're playing off of treasures. This card, I have played a ton of it. I have played it in Gruul. I have played it in Mono Red. The card is, in fact, very good. The problem is the support system around it and the spells. And, like, it's kind of like Delver of Secrets in that way, right? Like, one of the first decks that I actually built for the Standard format was both of these cards combined. One of our listeners actually hit Mythic with it after I did that episode. So it's not like it's unreasonable. It's just like they're doing red dirty. I don't know.
This is going to sound like a meme question, but have you played with the card in Alchemy? Because I was very surprised. I was watching some friends of mine do the decathlon events over the weekend, and there was a mono red deck that I thought played that card to a really, really.
I actually lost. I have not played it in Alchemy, but I lost to it in Alchemy this week.
Okay, yeah. Like, the mono red deck in Alchemy looked really solid, and it definitely felt like a good fit there because you were playing, like, Chandra Dress to Kill, and you had a lot more burn.
Yeah, the 2-mana deal to exile the top stuff is actually really good with this card.
That card is so insane.
It like really lets you pop off in a lot of ways, especially because, like, the Alchemy deck just has an ability to have a little bit more mana, the way the deck is built. So I don't hate my hit, but it won't be my hit moving forward. My sleepers are Sunset Revelry, which I think is still a sleeper. We have not seen a blue-white control deck, which is the thing that I was excited about with this card. My other sleeper, I just misread on the podcast. I thought the card did something different. Unnatural Moonrise. That's just not what the card does. We can move on.
I want to talk about Lear real quick before we move on, because I have a hot take about Lear. I'm not sure if that card stays playable as, like, the format gets bigger. I'm serious about that card. Like, I think, like, the more I've played with that card, I've had, like, I believe it was called the Dunning-Kruger effect with it, where it's been, like, high, low, high, but in the reverse, where I was low on the card, wow, I'm super high on the card, wow, I'm lower on the card. And I think part of that is the format growing in size, where things like Fading Hope have been such, like, a huge boon and benefit to Lear. And, like, and honestly, all the blue-red decks, like, having a 1-mana way to essentially interact and have a removal spell with how the blue-red decks play out. The Fading Hope actually just, like, is essentially one, because when they win the game, they win in these such a big and over-the-top fashion that unsummon is, like,
matters the most of them.
So yeah, I have a thought on this. I don't know if you've seen the blue black lists that I've been posting in our Patreon, but they actually play the 1-mana black removal spell in place of some of those Fading Hopes.
Bloodchief's their shade.
Yeah, and it actually has, like, fixed a lot of the problems that I had with Lear originally, where, like, I'm able to kill anything late game if I untap with it.
I do think that, like, that's a really valid way to feel about it, and I think that there's a lot to what you're saying, Mason. Like, we've seen cards like Shipbreak Horror enter the format in Vow and kind of muscle in on the space that Lear's taking. I don't know. I still think it's kind of hard for me to imagine a world where Lear completely disappears. I think that card, as much as it was in the time where it was so dominant, bolstered by the success of Fading Hope and how important that card was to reaching the endgame inevitability of Alrund's Epiphany and stuff in the format. The card pool might adapt to a point where it's too much of a cost to get your removal spells back again. But as long as there's cheap removal in the format, I think it's hard for me to imagine that card not being good. Like, just because the threats are getting better and cards like Fading Hope will get worse, I don't think means that the card will get worse. It just means that as long as the removal's keeping up, and this is the kind of game plan you can have, I think.
I hate to be that
as
dude,
long as
but
they're
like
just
if
fighting
Fading
for
Hope gets worse, quote unquote, it means that like it makes me feel like Delver, the Delver Bloodthirsty Adversary deck gets better.
I think the reason Fading Hope is good is because all the ways you win are with chunky creatures that aren't here.
Right. That's my point, right? Like if you're saying that part becomes bad, and you need a more tempo-driven game plan, it just changes.
Yeah, I would fear that Fading Hope being bad kind of means that Delver.
Yeah, I would expect Delver
too, right?
to need that sort of card, but maybe they don't.
So here's the thing: is like they use it like in my head they use it as a tool, right? Like they use like things like shock and stuff like that instead. I don't know. It's hard though because like one of the reasons that I think that blue-green deck that we mentioned earlier gets so much worse is how good mono white got. And it's like you're just under me. Like I actually just can't afford to be this like Fading Hope BS deck.
Yeah, I think that's part of the reason we see mono white do so well at times because it does dodge cards like Fading Hope,
right?
Like that sort of stuff,
right? Which is why I added that Bloodthirst or Blood Chief's Thirst to the blue-black deck. Is like these Fading Hope suck against mono white. Like you actually just have to do something else.
Yeah, I think if Blood Chief's Thirst kills stuff for 1 mana, that's true. Like,
or 2 mana in the case of Thalia.
Vishino Pyromancer, like that's a card that I imagine if it was in standard, things would look very different. Like having those sort of things would be really good, I think. But I don't know. I mean, it's one of those things too where it's like maybe as time goes on, it's going to go down, like in how impactful it is, and then when rotation happens, all these cards do stay. So it really depends on how like low to the ground the format goes, because right now all the decks are kind of mid-rangey, and like even the white deck at times plays out kind of mid-rangey. And so having a card like Lear is really doable, but like Spencer said, like the mono red decks don't really exist, and so like,
they don't. They're just bad. I mean, the mono red Dragon's deck in Alchemy is pretty good, but like that's just a mid-range deck.
Yeah, and it has a problem with Fading Hope too, right? Like the perpetual nature of that one card changes things, but it is a really weird place to be. All right, Abe, do you want to pick us up with the Crimson Vow cards?
Yeah, so my Vow hits were Valorous Stance and Hopeful Initiate. I was really betting big on like mono white being a deck that came to tier 1 and kind of moved up a leg in the metagame, and I thought these cards were definitely a part of it. I think training is a super good mechanic. It feels like both these cards have kind of made a pretty lasting impact.
Well, both of them are not in mono white anymore, Abe.
They don't play these cards anymore?
No.
I'm exposed.
To be fair, they're wrong, and these cards are great, but they're a lot. I mean, some of them will still play Valor Stance to the sideboard. Some of them will use Hopeful Initiate as a 1-drop, depending on the list. But like, these are not staples, and they should be.
You were talking earlier about the like exile builds with like Stonehaven Familiar and stuff. I'm assuming is what you're talking about.
It just depends on how many 1-drops the decks want to play, right? And what their split will look like. But like, I am personally not a fan of the exile builds. I think that you're specifically better against the mirror. You also have some game against mono green, but I think that like every mono white deck is actually favored against mono green secretly. If you just build your deck to beat it. Yeah, I think that both of these cards are complete hits. Valorous Stance was actually a card that I forgot was in Crimson Vow until you said something on the podcast, and then I was like, oh yeah, I'm like all in on mono white.
I think Valorous Stance also shows up sometimes in like Jeskai builds of the Epiphany decks to answer various 4-toughness creatures, and also I think opposing Hullbreaker Horrors and stuff, and like protect Leers. Just has a little bit of utility there and is very splashable. So I feel pretty safe in that one, having played out pretty okay.
I'm gonna have a hot take about Valorous Stance later, but I actually think that like as the formats grow, we talked about some cards that were getting worse as the formats grow. Valorous Stance is one I think gets better as the formats grow.
And then my sleepers were Cobbled Lancer and Thirst for Discovery, both kind of blue cards in a shell that I don't think is quite there yet, but I stand by both of them being pretty good.
I think Thirst has still seen play, right? Like that, I've seen blue lists that play Thirst. It's harder though because of the way that like the blue decks worked out, where they were playing Unexpected Windfall. If you were playing other versions, Thirst for Discovery can make an impact. That might be something I'd be willing to try in like blue black for what it's worth. Is like that's one of the decks I'm really high on still in Standard.
Yeah, if counter magic gets a little better, just overall in the format, then Thirst for Discovery is awesome because you're probably going to be playing cancels, and this 3-mana draw spell is really good. But it is just a powerful draw spell. I think it's got a lot of chops.
So my hits, I think, were spot on. Thalia, Guardian of Thraben, and Uvenwald Oddity. I think both these cards are... I said on the podcast that Uvenwald Oddity would take spots away from Chariot, and it did. Leads me to believe that I was right. Like, it may only be a 2-of, but like, I think even at the Pro Tour, right? Like, they were 3 Chariots, 2 Uvenwald Oddities. Like, just...
I didn't watch the Pro Tour. I don't know. I'm sorry.
I think Oddity does this really cool thing where, like, Mono Green really does have a problem with getting flooded. Like, despite the fact that you've got these ranger classes and these other things that, like, have this flood protection, you need more of it. I think it's one of your sleepers, or it might even be one of your hits too, Mason.
That's my hit, yeah.
Yeah, I just think that, like, you know, right now we live in a world where Chariot in Standard is still busted, and, like, you only have room for 74 drops, but it legitimately changed the way that I built my mono green decks. So, for example, like, I don't play 4 Mammoth anymore. I actually play some number of the Florahedron because, like, that's just how good that card is. And then Thalia is just as annoying as I said it would be on the podcast. I lost to Thalia 3 times today. I think the card is complete BS and has made Standard substantially worse. Also, the other thing is, like, they already had a bunch of tax cards. I think I posted a taxes standard list in our Discord. I was like, if you want to make people upset, just play this. People sent me pictures of them getting mythic with it. Like, Thalia is BS. It's a terrible design. I can't believe it's in Standard. It is a total hit. It is very good. I played it a ton. I played a ton of mono white. But, like, when you start putting 1/1 counters on your freaking Thalia, from whether it's your flashback, put a 1/1 counter, or whether it's your 2-drop that, like, puts a 1/1 counter every turn, Thalia's busted. I think my hits are great. My sleepers, Volatile Arsonist. This card sees historic play. It sees standard play. It sees play all over the place. If you have not played with this card and you always play the other versions of this card, whether it be Goldspan Dragon or other 5-drops, this card is really good.
Yeah, what deck plays it in Historic?
I lost to it in the mono red Historic that Abe and I were talking about earlier. The deck that plays the Bloodthirsty Adversary. It plays 2 of these as its 5-drop over the Goldspan Dragon.
Glorybringer?
Oh, is Glorybringer in Historic?
You're talking about Alchemy. Do you mean Alchemy or Historic? Because I haven't seen the card in Historic, but I could believe it.
I'm pretty sure it was Historic because I was playing the mono red mirror in Historic.
Okay, I don't know why they're playing this over Glorybringer. Then it must have been in addition to Glorybringer.
Maybe
they are like.
Here's the thing. Here's the thing about this card. Let me go into this card. Like, when I talked about this card on the podcast, I actually got 2 messages that, like, poo-pooed on this card, and I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. This card has haste and evasion, and like can ETB basically kill something. It does everything a good Magic card does. And I still think it's a sleeper. Like, if it's ever nighttime when you cast this card, like, your opponent loses the game. Like, they actually just don't. They don't come back from that in any creature mirror. That being said, it has a lot of competition. It's a 5-drop. And I understand that part. But I think it was a good sleeper pick. My last card is Dorothea, Vengeful Victim is my other sleeper. The blue-white deck fell off hard. Whether it was blue-white Tempo, blue-white Delver, like, there's just not a blue-white aggressive deck that wants this card right now. I'm not giving up on this card because of, like, the theory of words that Casey and I talked about on this show so many times. The theory of words falls apart pretty quickly when every card has 2,000 words on it.
Yeah, your theory of words doesn't hold up to Fire Design standards.
It's really true, right? Like, I actually thought about doing an episode about how Fire changes the theory of words, but I do still think this card, like, has some legs. It just has to be in the right deck and the right format. But it is not this format. Yeah. Let's just be clear. In case anyone's wondering, it's not this one.
Yeah, I'll be curious to see what that card's history is like in a year and a half from now when it rotates. That is what I'm most curious about.
It's hard, right? Because, like, you would think that this would put the kind of pressure that you want on some of the decks in the format, But the problem is like, does it do it better than something else? And is blue-white the color combination to beat the decks trying to beat the decks you're trying to beat?
Yes, sir. It's hard for a mid-range deck to exist with the way the format is right now. And I think that's where, like, something where this can play offense or defense, pressuring the right kinds of decks, like just getting your chunk in for 4 and then being an aura, or trading off or holding down the ground to give you time to develop to where you're ahead enough to play this aura that kind of, like, closes the game quickly. It's just not in the right place. I do think the card has a lot of chops, though. It's definitely on rate a card I could see wanting.
Yeah.
In various kinds of matchups that have existed over Magic history. There's definitely times where I'd be like, yeah, 2 mana 4/4, always going to trade with something, and then I'll have this value.
It reminds me of like a lot of, for what it's worth, it reminds me of like a lot of 4 mana cards that were like good on rate, did something good, format didn't work out for them. And it could be because the total cost of this card is like 5 mana, right? Where like, that's why it adds up to like that kind of similar vein, because you kind of split that cost, end up with around 4 mana equity. But yeah, it is not good. What were you going to say, Mason?
I think the card's too much work is the problem.
I think that could be true.
A format where you actually have to go through, you have to jump through all these hoops to get this value, and that is too much for, I think, a lot of formats. And I actually think there's a lot of things in this format that would make this card good outside of Lear. You know, if Lear or something like that gets banned, or Alrens, or just as an example, like, this card would be really good in Alchemy in theory, but it just doesn't do enough. You know what I mean?
It's funny you say that, because like, my thought the other day is that the thing this thing is missing is good mana. Like, I would love this card in like a Jeskai Delver deck, or like some kind of 3-color tempo deck. Let's say that we want that to be Naya, or I guess it has to be Bant or Jeskai, basically, right? Or like the only options. And those are rough spots right now. Like, there's not good Bant mana, there's not good Jeskai mana. There's the cards to support that.
And not for casting a blue-white spell on turn 2, right?
Right,
Slow lands are very
exactly.
strong,
Yeah.
And the pathways are strong, but they're not good for casting multiple different blips early on. It's just...
Yes. They're good for...
Not the right environment.
They're good... Like, if I want to build just a control deck, I probably have the mana for that.
No, so I'm just thinking about the card, and I was thinking, I don't know if I want to play Boros Charm. And it's essentially Boros Charm in an aggressive deck, right? Like, it's Boros Charm and Flashback.
I think it's a little bit better than Boros Charm with Flashback, right? Because, like, it plays another avenue in the main deck than Boros Charm does. I also don't want to go too deep into this card. I kind of agree with Abe where it's like it has the chops, but this is not the format for it. But I also like what you...
where, like, I feel good. If I have a deck where I feel good getting in for 4 with this thing, and then doing the other thing with it sometimes, and sometimes trading off with a creature, and then, like, I don't know, Ojutai's Command, countering something, and bringing this back to, like, keep the battlefield stable for myself. Those kind of situations, I think this card could do great, but those just aren't the situations in the format.
I think that leads into what Mason said, though, right? Where, like, the work, like, you don't have the time to put in the work for this card.
Yeah.
I think that's true for a lot of cards in Standard, by the way. It's actually one of the more surprising things that Lear is worth putting the time into. For instance, I think it is telling that the card can spark so much conversation without very clear, definitive, like, good and or bad. You know what I mean? I think a lot of cards that have the potential to be good have these kind of conversations to follow them up. Where other cards like Hobbled Lancer or whatever, and this particular card like doesn't really get as much attention, right? Well, I think that's something to note about it. My hit was Wash Away and Overworld Oddity. Overworld Oddity, we already talked about. That's the Mooser. I will say that it is good in the green deck. Now the green deck has changed, which I did have to. I said on the show that, like, you know, I would not play more than one of them in the old green deck, and the new green deck has adapted accordingly. Wash Away has done really, really well in the blue decks as a way to answer Alrens in the mirror, and has been, like, you know, a pivotal sideboard card, and has been like better cancel in those decks for the most part. So,
yeah, can I touch on Wash Away really quick?
Yeah, hit me.
Yeah, this is something that we talked about. I've got the group of people playing Standard at Oasis right now, and Wash Away is a really interesting card where I think that, like, if you're going to play a cancel effect, especially in a format with Lear, this is the one you want to play. Because once Lear hits the battlefield, this card is completely dead. So you want opportunities where the card is really good before Lear hits the battlefield. And that's really important. Obviously, once Lear hits the battlefield, the card just goes away. But like, if you look at the first list that I posted for Blue Black in the Discord, I had a 1-1 split between this and the Foretell version, the Foretell cancel. Don't play the Foretell cancel. This card's just better. And the number of times where the 1-mana version of this spell comes up is immense in this format. Like, it happens a lot.
My sleepers are kind of the same story of the 4/4 we were talking about earlier. It's Dig Up and Headless Rider. That's just not worth the effort. The format's in a place where mid-range decks are very hostile to right now, so like Dig Up isn't very good. And Headless Rider needs some more support if it's going to be there, but it's also kind of a mid-range card. And they're just a lot of work, and a lot of cards, I think, currently, if they need to be really worth the sauce if you're going to play them, and they need to be really good if you're going to jump through any hoops. And so these cards are just not worth that.
Hard disagree on the Headless Rider. First of all, I misread this card. Mason did a challenge to us to not misread our cards during the Crimson Vow set review. And fun fact, I did not misread any of my cards during the Crimson Vow set review. I did misread Mason's card and thought this card was just a straight up way better version of other cards that we have had. I didn't realize it had the Zombies clause. That being said, this card makes zombies possible in Standard. I don't know if you've played that deck yet, Mason. That deck's insane. I've had...
Oh, is it? I'm unimpressed when I played a couple.
Oh, yeah. The deck is absolutely busted. It has matchups against mono green, mono white, and the blue-red deck. I don't think that it could have taken second in that event without that, but like the deck is gas. I don't know how to fix the problems with the deck. I think that is kind of what you're alluding to, where it's like it has two very different game plans, right? This aggressive game plan and this like recursion game plan. But I think the truth is that it's just our recursion deck that like can sometimes cheese somebody out. And I think that as the format grows, Headless Rider will actually get better.
Okay, well, let's hop into, with hindsight, how we would do these sort of things. And let's start with Abe with Midnight Hunt. And we are going to kind of move through these.
We actually all agreed across the board here that if we could pick the two hits, we would say Lear was one of them, and that Memory Deluge was the other card that went from being this like, oh, it's kind of a cool flashback like draw to a card that has seen play in Modern, replaced Factor Fiction in that format, and really just shown up huge. The card is just a lot better than even it looked at face value. And for me, I would say that my sleepers are Florian, which has been a huge supporter for the black-red mid-range decks. They're kind of fringe, but exist, and also the Jund mid-range decks is a creature that generates some card advantage. Very innocuous because it looks like there's a lot of steps to it, but in the way those decks play is an effect they really want and really make good use out of. A card that I think no one was talking about for constructed implications, really, that really is performed. And Galvanic Iteration, which I think everyone wrote off as being a casual card, a commander card, not for your standard decks and your constructed play, and is just part of what is considered by many the biggest problem with standard is forking Galvanic Iterations and forking Unexpected Windfalls and just the value that it generates with some of these spells and how it lets you completely take them over and turn it around. So those are mine.
Like I said, all of our hits are the same for this set. My sleepers were Iteration as well, and then Storm the Festival. We already kind of talked about these cards, but Iteration just did not get talked about really, and I think we missed our. I may not miss. A lot of people underestimated copying itself than copying the follow-up thing actually being a thing. Another example of like the juice is really worth the squeeze, and it is actually worth it with this sort of card. Also, because you can break it up in parts. Spencer, what about you?
I don't know if this was one of Mason's hits, but Reckless Stormseeker did a lot of work in Standard in its time so far in Midnight Hunt. I don't know that I heard anybody other than Mason talk about it, but the card put in freaking work. And then a card that I heard actually nobody talk about that's put in a ton of work is Adeline Resplendent Cathar. Holy crap. That card is so good. Yeah, the card's insane. Just a complete sleeper in the format. So yeah, those are my two.
in a format already so long on white 3-drops, for one to come out that immediately, makes people not always playing Force Conclave Apparition, not always playing 4 Elite Spellbinder, that it's contending with these really powerful cards that we see come set after set in that mana cost. Absolute blow-away card. So
I felt like on the hits, by the way, just to kind of add to that really quickly, that Memory Deluge surprised me a lot, and I just wanted to touch on that. Like, there were so many other cards in contention for this slot. I think even in like week 2 of that card coming out, like we talked about like splitting Memory Deluge, and like I've been adding Memory Deluges to my deck constantly. Fun fact, Dig Through Time is a really good card, and the fact that like you get the front half to be like, look at the top 4, put 2 into your hand, and the second half is Dig Through Time is like kind of busted. It plays out better than you would think.
Yeah, I think Hall of the Storm Giants has a bit to do with that too. That even comes up in Modern, where the turn you're at 7 mana to make it so that it's bad for your opponent to attack into your 7/7, that you just get to flash it back when they don't. They're like damned if they do, damned if they don't. And so it really is a lot easier to cast both halves than it maybe seemed at first. So
fun fact, I actually still like playing the Giants Saga, the blue-red one, because of this card. The blue-red decks, I think it's still good.
Hey, what about you with Crimson Vow?
Once again, we agree across the board about the hits. Thalia and Hullbreaker Horror are the biggest hits. None of us really talked about Hullbreaker Horror.
That's not true. You actually had it on your list. It just wasn't in your hits or sleeper, Abe.
Yeah,
I kind of wish it wasn't hopeful about it, because it's kind of done some pretty messed up things in the format. Just being another powerful 7-mana thing, especially one that doesn't get, taxed by Redain, doesn't fall victim to the same kinds of things that Epiphany does, kind of forks you in that way. The card just has become a format definer, probably one of the only cards people really seek after in the set Crimson Vow, as I've learned from drafting for the rares over the last few months.
If you've played a lot of Primeval Titan, you've had a moment where somebody's like, that card has trample? Why does that card have trample? It's like a thing that you've heard a human say when you attack with it. And this card is like, why does it have flash? Like, why? Is a thing that...
Yeah, why is it a flash? Why can't it be countered?
Yeah,
why can it protect itself by bouncing it?
Yeah,
just like, why can it bounce spells off the stack? Why can it do all of these things? Is definitely a feeling I've had playing against that card in Limited. And so, in Standard as well, it's just a powerhouse, and really came out swinging, as I said. Hard to not say it's a hit. My sleepers for Crimson Vow were Blood-Tide Harvester, which took vampires from kind of like a Mimi tribal deck to something that people do actually play. I see on the ladder. Really just enables like kind of the core of that curve in a way that I didn't expect. And Concealing Curtains, which also was part of the mono black decks Resurgence and Rise. So
my sleepers. It's interesting as we talk about Wash Away being so good, but I put Wash Away. I feel like some people, there's still some debate on that versus the Foretell one and that sort of thing. And then Hopeful Initiate, like I mentioned, that card is quite good and has done a lot of work in the Historic Humans deck. Free Luminarch Aspirant Nerf, that was a really powerful interaction. Still very good, but just a card that's been quite good, and I'm sure we'll continue to see play in Standard.
For what it's worth, Hopeful Initiate is like insane in the mono white mirror if you play it late. So like if you're playing a non-exile version versus an exile version, if you make them exile your stuff with their portable holes first, and then you play your Hopeful Initiates after that, I found that's a great way to win the mono white mirror.
How about you and your sleepers, Spencer?
So I have 2 sleepers. Volatile Arsonist is one of my sleepers. I think this card is super underrated. Depending on the format, it is probably better than Goldspan Dragon. I know that's kind of a hot take, but like I do think it's that good. And then Felstinger is a card that I just did not expect to fall in love with. This is like the most clunky 3-mana dirtily card that I've ever seen. But like I've killed opponents with the effect. It's funny that you have not enjoyed that Zombies deck, Mason, because it feels like the opposite of the kind of deck that I would enjoy and the exact type of deck that you would enjoy.
Sometimes things happen.
Yeah.
They just don't hit for the right person. They hit for the other.
And Felstinger, it sees play in a few decks. The Zombies standard deck, but also I've seen it see play in Alchemy in the black-red deck. To pretty great success. I'm pretty impressed with the card. I don't know what it reminds me of, but like the fact that this thing has Death Touch is probably the entire thing holding this card together. But I think it was a complete sleeper and becomes like kind of like one of those like Burning Tree Emissary where like sure it's fine, like a role player that you didn't expect.
To me, felt like it was one of those cards where it was like, this is going to be one of my best cards in my sealed pool, or a card I'm going to pick highly in draft because it's a lot of value. And yeah, seeing that kind of effect really work its way into standard and show up and still be valuable in that kind of deck, just because it does all of these things well enough. Like sometimes you just do want to turn a creature into 2 cards, or sometimes you just need those last 2 points damage, or the 3/2 Death Touch is good. Yeah, it's definitely a card that I think looks fine enough, and like you'd maybe consider playing. Like you definitely consider playing in a low power format like draft or limited, but not one that you would normally expect to show up in standard. So,
can I ask you guys an honest question? Was I right about Thalia, or was I too intense?
You're too intense. I think so. I think you just don't enjoy that play pattern a whole bunch, but I don't think it's been that big a deal. But I haven't played a lot of the format. But I've played a good amount of Alchemy, and I've played against that card a fair amount there, and it's not been a problem at all. In fact, I find myself cutting it from my sideboards a lot. I find it ineffective at doing what I want. That is obviously different than Standard, and in my small experience I've had with Standard, I have found it to be just not an issue. Like, it throws you off a little bit, but it's no worse than having a card with Ward. You know what I mean? So,
okay,
that's my experience.
What do you think, Gabe?
Yeah, I'm also not as anti-Thalia as you, just in general. And I don't know. I think it's kind of weird. I think that with the way that cards have been coming out, where they've been putting emphasis on trying to make people play more than just creatures and premium spells, and really diversify the kinds of cards you're putting in your deck, and a more of a focus on non-creature spells, even inside of creature decks, that adding Thalia has really added a layer of like consideration to the format of when Thalia is really good. How do you construct your deck to not be weak to Thalia? And as much as in-game play, where Thalia can be a very frustrating card to play against, and I've definitely experienced that more than a fair share of times, and how much it sucks, like as a gameplay experience, for you to not feel like you can cast your spells. I think that it does a lot of good invisibly to exist in the format. So I don't know. I understand where you're coming from in hating playing against the card and thinking that it's bad for gameplay and not liking it. But I think that when you look at it like all the way pulled back as far as you can, at least as far as I can, I don't see it as much problem as you do.
Yeah, it's funny. I played more Thalia than I played against it, and I don't know. I think it's unfun. I don't know. I wish it wasn't in the format.
Like I said, no one likes to pay their taxes. It's not a fun part of the game. I say this about stealth video games all the time, but I'm like, the core mechanic of this game, because I hate stealth video games, is that we sit around and wait for other people to be in the place I need them to be so I can not be seen by them or whatever. This sucks. My least favorite things are waiting around for things outside of my control. So waiting around for some random computer-controlled thing to not be looking at me sucks. And in the same way, having to pay more mana for the stuff you want to cast sucks. But it keeps people honest. It makes people play more creatures and, do things to avoid paying that tax. So it's definitely a double-edged sword with the effects it has in the format, and it's not for everyone, and it's frustrating. So I don't think you're crazy for feeling that way, but
the 2 hits are both just super frustrating cards for the format, I think. We all have the same 2 hits, and they're all just like, yeah, this just sucks. Like, I wish this wasn't here. Like if we removed Hullbreaker Horror and Thalia, I think we'd all, like, as a cast, would be happier.
Yeah, maybe Hullbreaker Horror is even part of a reaction to Thalia, Like, why do they even need to play this creature in the Epiphany decks?
It's true, because like, Epiphany becomes so much worse when Thalia exists.
That's going to do it for this week's episode of Constructed Criticism. The show will always be free, but if you want to support the show directly, you can go to patreon.com/ccmtg. Get a lot of perks. You can enter those tournaments like we talked about last week with Kane. But you also get to ask us questions. And Dilly G from Discord says, what's the best way to lose? And I would say that is just, a close game that you played well in. You did everything you could.
I'll go next on this one. I think that, like, I talked about this on the Common Knowledge podcast that'll come out that I guessed on, but like, I think a huge part of improving at Magic is actually being okay with losing. You know, that's actually the reason that Smash Bros came up on that podcast that we talked about earlier in the show, is that like at some point you just have to be okay with the fact that you're going to lose sometimes. Because if you're not, this game is too frustrating to play. So what is the best way to lose? I think it's just a game in which you learn something. Like if you get to lose and you have a takeaway from that, I think that's a pretty big moment of improvement for you, and it's something that is going to help you long term. That's a loss worth taking. Like in all honesty, like if you get to leave a match that you lost and be better at Magic because of it, I think that's the best way to lose. You know, it makes those moments in Magic that are frustrating, like mulligans or mana screw or mana flood, harder. But I think the moments where you win through those things offset that, right? Like if you win through mana screw or you win through mana flood and you get to learn like, how do I combat this thing? It's kind of the same thing. You know, winning through adversity and losing through adversity are kind of symmetrical. There's a really good moment it's actually the moment where former co-host Matt Kling said, "Spencer, I just realized you're really good at Magic." He watched me play a game where I got stuck on 3 lands, and like won a game. It was like a deck where with Thrun the Last Troll, and like I revolved my game around resolving Thrun, attacking with Thrun, protecting Thrun. And he's like, that was you did what you could do to win the game. And the moments where you're gonna lose because you didn't think of your ways out and learn from those mistakes. Don't lose because you gave up. That would be my answer. What about you, Abe?
The best way to lose is when your teammates in the team event are winning their matches and are going to win.
Dude, I did that. I played a GP in a team event where I did not finish a match.
Yeah, I've definitely had multiple events where we've come very close to cashing, where I've gone like 3 and like there was one where I scrapped for like all 7 match points I earned in that tournament, and I went like 3, like 10-1 or something. It was terrible. But you know, those are good ones to win, or good ones to lose. Ones where you learn something very immediate are great ways to lose. Like, I don't know if you ever lost game 2 because you made a bad sideboarding decision and you were like kind of close when you were sideboarding for game 2, and then you go, okay, that was really bad, and now you can adjust when you still have a place to go with it. And I would say the next best way to lose is in a way that you're having fun doing it. You know, if you can learn to love the losses you take in Magic, I think you will go a lot farther than if you don't, and you'll avoid burnout, and you know, you'll have a great time with it. So half the games you play around, even if you're one of the best players, 40% of the games you play, you'll lose. So
thank you so much for
every one of those 40%.
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you so much for the question. DM me. We'll hook you up with some Oasis Games store credit or a promo from Oasis Games. Thank you so much to our sponsor that sponsors every question on this podcast, whether it's a Patreon question, a Twitter question, or if you just leave a YouTube comment. Oasis Games is going to hook you up, and we're going to help them out doing that. So thank you so much.
That's going to do it for this week's episode. If you want to find us on social media, you can, of course, always find us on Twitter at CCMTG. That is the channel's Twitter account. But you can find us each on individual and other places. You can find me on Twitter at Mason E. Clark. You can find me on YouTube at Mason Clark MTG. And you can find me at twitch.tv/the Mason Clark. And if you want to get a Mana Traders discounted code, you have to check out that stream because maybe there's something cool there. Go take a look at that. Abe, if someone wants to find you, where can they go?
Twitter.com/more-no-things. DM still looking for coaching. You know, I tweet occasionally, usually about things. So, Spencer, how about you?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Spencer30H. You can find my other podcast over on at Need to Nerd Pod on Twitter, but on the He's Game Media YouTube channel. You can find me lurking in the comments of the Mason Clark YouTube channel at He's a Game Media. I think that he's creating amazing YouTube content. I really appreciated it. I love what he's doing over there. and you should definitely check it out. You can also check out the rest of the network. There's so many good things. It was really cool. I heard that Homeward Path is multiple people's favorite podcast over the last week. We got one of the best drafting podcasts in drafting archetypes, and in all honesty, like with all the podcasts calling it quits, guys, we might be the best constructed podcast again. Like, let's go.
Always have been.
Always will be. Let's go.
Thank you all so much for listening. See you all next week for the post-Christmas episode of CCMTG.